Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name's Monica Miller, and I work at Caitlin Press as the Marketing and Promotions Coordinator, and I'm excited to celebrate Kate Braid's book with you, Hammer and Nail, Notes of a Journeywoman. So I'm going to do some introductions, and then I'll introduce Kate and Lou Allison, who's our host for the day, and then I will let them take it away. So just some quick housekeeping. If you're not familiar, Caitlin Press is an independent Canadian publisher located on the Sunshine Coast in British Columbia. We publish culturally significant books, including fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. And Caitlin Press is also the home of Dagger Editions, an imprint for the voices of queer women-identifying writers. And I'd like to acknowledge that Caitlin Press receives support from the Government of Canada and the British Columbia Arts Council as a small independent publisher, which in COVID times is even more important than ever. So even though this is a virtual event and we're reaching you wherever in the world you are, we're in Canada and we're on the land of Indigenous peoples. So Caitlin Press is located in Half Moon Bay, which is the traditional territories of the Squamish, Seashelt, and Sliamon and Clahoosie First Nations. Myself, I'm reaching you from Vancouver, which is the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. Kate Braid is located in Victoria and Pender Island. Victoria is the traditional territories of the Lukwagan, including the Songhees and Esquimalt and the Wasonic people. And Pender Island is the traditional territories of the Coast Salish. And actually, Kate and I were just trying to figure out if we could be more specific about that, but it seems that a lot of groups possibly used it seasonally. And our host, Lou Allison, joins us from Dodge Cove and works in Prince Rupert, both the unceded territory of the Tsimshian Nation. So we'd love to hear where you're joining us from. So let us know in the chat, which brings me to some housekeeping. If you're using a browser, you'll see the chat on your right-hand side. And if you want to, you can join us in there. I will be in there chatting with people as the event takes place. If you prefer not to see that, if you find it distracting, up at the top left-hand corner, there's a tiny little gray arrow that you can hide the chat. If you're in the Crowdcast app, I believe you just swipe right. If you have questions for Kate, Lou will be taking audience questions at the end of the event. Down on the bottom, there's an Ask a Question button. So you can ask it in there, or you can ask it in the chat, and I will make sure to tag it as a question. And Lou will get to as many as she can. You can also look at questions that other people have added, and if you see one and you just have this burning desire, this is the question I need answered, you can vote upvote the question. So we know that, lots of people want to know the answer to this, Kate. And one of the last things is to buy the book. I mean, we are here promoting this wonderful, lovely book. We've got lots of lovely, I love French flaps. It's a gorgeous book. And so on the screen, there's a buy the book button. That'll take you to Caitlin Press's website. We ship books across Canada. If you're located in a town or city where you have an independent bookstore that you love, we would strongly support you. We would strongly encourage you to support your independent bookseller. In Victoria, I know that Monroe's, Boland's, and Russell's all carry Hammer and Nail, and Lou recommends Eddie's News in Prince Rupert if you're joining us from any of those locations. If you don't know where your bookseller is, you can also ask in the chat, and I will try and help you out and find where you can buy the book locally. So I'd now like to let Lou and Kate take it away. I'll just give you their short bios in case you need a refresher or if you're unfamiliar with either of them. So Kate Braid worked as a receptionist, secretary, teacher's aide, lumber piler, construction laborer, apprentice, and journey carpenter before becoming a teacher. She has taught construction and creative writing, written several books of creative nonfiction, and award-winning poetry. In 2012, she was declared one of Vancouver's remarkable women of the arts, and in 2015, she was awarded the Mayor of Vancouver's Award for the Literary Arts. Lou Allison lives in Dodge Cove and commutes by boat to Prince Rupert, where she works in the Prince Rupert Public Library, which is actually where she's joining us from today. She also co-owns a large vessel called the Far Reach and a small business called Tidal Enterprises with her spouse, Jeremiah. Before getting the late-in-life job at the library, Lou worked for 3 decades on the water. She edited the stories of Gumboot Girls and Dancing in Gumboots, both published by Caitlin Press. So I will let Kate and Lou take it away. Here we go.
Hi, everybody. Most especially hi to you, Kate. You have a really impressive line of books, but I thought we would just mostly focus on the one that we're promoting today or that we're launching. But this one also sort of is a lead-in to it, also published by Caitlin Press, Journeywoman. And I thought we could start off by me asking you, how is Hammer and Nail different from Journeywoman?
When I wrote Journeywoman, which was published in 2012, I wrote it because at that point, I'd been in the trade for 15 years plus, and there had not been a book by another woman talking about what's it like on a day-to-day basis in the trades. And I thought we needed that book. It would have been hugely helpful to me to have something like that. So I set out to write that book. And since I'd been taking notes every night after work for those 15 years, I had a lot of material. So Journeywoman was just my life. It was the big picture. But that was 2012. And I started, there've been a few more books, but what I realized was what has not changed is the number of women in trades. So way back when I started in the trades, 1977, we were 3%, roughly, it's hard to get the exact numbers, but roughly 3% of the women in trades in BC. The federal government didn't even keep those statistics. I went and did the research and found it. But so today, which is about 43 years later, in BC, we are 5%. And in Canada, we're 4%. In the US, they're 3% and going down. So I thought, okay, we've got a problem here. And I had some good ideas, I thought, about what the problem was and how to fix it. So I wrote Hammer and Nail. A friend of mine on Pender Island, I have a wonderful writing group. Thank you all, Muddies. One of the women said to me, she read one of the essays in it, and she said, Journeywoman was a really cheerful, helpful book, but she said, these essays are more not so cheerful. And I thought, that's exactly right, because in this book, I get more down to the nitty gritty of, okay, this is what's going on. This is how you cope. And the issues, most people think it's harassment for women. I don't think it is. I think the issues are the isolation that we experience. I never, ever worked on a job with another woman unless it was my own job when I contracted, or I worked for another woman contractor. And that's still pretty much the case. And the other reason is the culture of the workplace, which most women last in the trades for maybe a year and a half, 2 years, and then drop out, which was exactly actually what I did. I worked for 2 years as a laborer, and then I thought, I have burning questions. I can't keep doing this. And that's when I went back to school, did my thesis and master's thesis on women in trades, and got my questions answered. And some of those are in this book. That's the long answer.
Having read and enjoyed both, I found that in Hammer and Nail, it's more of a distillation. It's just tighter, a little shorter maybe, and more direct. Mm-hmm. A little less discursive, but equally enjoyable. And it's not like there's a little bit of overlap, but they're quite different books. Anyway, what stood out for me, you asked me, well, what did you think when you read my book when we talked the other evening? And what stood out for me was the oscillation you had between being afraid and being confident, being strong and weak, being connected to the men you work with or profoundly alienated, depending on the crew or the foreman. You write that contradiction really well. Would you like to speak to that rhythm in your work?
Yeah, and that was actually, I think that's one of the issues I think that drives women out a lot. And thank you for your question, because it made me think more about this. And one of the things that I figured out by traveling around BC, talking to other women, writing about it, was that we're caught because of this cultural differences. And I could read a bit from the book about where that culture showed up, what I'm calling culture. We're caught in this double bind. So for example, you go on the job, you're the first woman they've ever worked with, you're the only woman on the job, you know they're watching you. Lots of times they tell you they're watching you. They'll tell you if you don't work out, they're never hiring another woman. So there's a lot of pressure. And so you work hard. Then the guys resent you because you're showing them up. So it's a sort of one of those double binds where you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Yeah, double bind.
Yeah. Another example is swearing. You go on the job and the guys stop swearing because there's a lady present. And then they resent you because you made them stop swearing. So you start swearing, trying to fit in. And then they're shocked that a lady would swear. So those kind of things are really difficult to get around. And the other point of dealing with these contradictions is just that, especially in construction, the crews change. So some crews are wonderful and some crews are not so hot. A lot of that I discovered had to do with the foreman's attitude and how he was handling, always a he, except when I was working for women, how he handled the job. Do you want me to read a bit?
If you have a passage in mind.
That? Yeah. Well, first, maybe what I'll do is I'll read you a bit about the culture so people have a bit of a sense of that. If people have the book, this is on page 124, the chapter, What I Learned from the Men. It took 2 or 3 years to learn the culture, including that sarcastic humor with which men defend themselves and quietly duel. The point of it for most men is hierarchy. Who's the quickest, smartest, strongest? Wow, what a man. By the way, I learned a lot of this. It was very helpful from Deborah Tannen, who's written this great book called You Just Don't Understand, about men's and women's language. For me, who was mercifully not required to compete, I eventually figured out how to make those one-line, slightly cynical, slightly mocking cracks that meant I was one of them, even if I was a bit odd-looking. But still, on most crews, I became one of the team. I talked the talk. I'll just give you another example of the talk. This is a chapter called, on page 49, How to Make It Work. And it's a directly addressing young women and young men, because I've actually coached men who were shocked by the culture of construction, who wanted to be construction workers. So this chapter directly addresses, here's some of the tips for getting along on the job, and here's the one for the talk. The first time you hear lunchtime conversation on a construction job is usually the first time you'll know for sure you're in a foreign country. Only this one sells no postcards. Remember, a construction worker's talk is usually based on hierarchy and on who can be the best, funniest, and quickest in repartee. Guys love to put each other down in fun, well, sort of fun. If they do this with you, and you notice they've been doing it to each other, it's probably meant to include you and make you feel like one of the crew. Take it as a compliment and try to quit back. So, I'll just I'll read you one more short piece around that. This is on page 102. Over the years, I very slowly, on some jobs more than others, became one of them, or at least I could see what was going on. For example, one day in the shack before work, the new guy asked when payday was. Didn't they tell you? Someone said. On this job, you work the first month for free, on trial. And before the new guy could respond, someone else said, yep. And in that month, you have to give up smoking, drinking, and sex. Otherwise, then we all laughed. And the new guy laughed too, but nervously. And we all knew that for a moment, he bought it. A one-up on him. Welcome to the crew. So, and then just to talk a bit more directly about the contradictions, where I think some of those came from. This is on page 26. Every day I had to be guarded, prepared for how any particular man might react. He might be fine one day, then have a fight with the wife the night before and decide to take it out on me. Or one who's watched me carefully for a few days, even a few weeks, is suddenly alarmed at how capable I am, especially after I'd spent 10 or more years in the trade. What if women can have babies, do the emotional housework at home, and also build, do men's work, as people tend to call it? Suddenly, that guy decides I shouldn't be here. If he's my laborer, he starts ignoring me, not bringing the materials I need, so the foreman gets mad at me, wondering why I'm suddenly so damn slow. Or he's my partner, and suddenly stops telling me what the foreman just asked both of us to do, so I can't foresee what's coming.
Yeah. Difficult. Always a balance, and maybe that's one reason, like you say, the women leave, because it's just so exhausting.
Yeah,
having to participate in all of this, psychological analysis on the job as well as do the work.
Yeah,
and it makes you a more effective worker the better you understand. But actually, I find, Kate, you're a very honest writer. Your books are very straightforward, and they're revealing too. Did you struggle in your journey as a writer with this level of exposure?
The short answer is yes.
I guess that. I mean, how not? And yet it's so breathtakingly honest and just straightforward.
I think what kept me on that track was I realized when I was writing Journeywoman that it wasn't going to be any help to women if I exaggerated the good or the bad, because it was both. So I made that commitment to myself that I would be as honest as I could possibly be in this book, both the good and the bad, because it's also just one person's experience, right? Other tradeswomen, and I hope those of you who are out there are thinking of writing your own books, we need the stories of other women coping, just so we all know this is possible, we can do this. And the men know it's possible, we can do this. So that got me going. But on Journeywoman, and I worked on that book for years, and this was one of the problems, was I felt so vulnerable. I felt so exposed by being as honest as I really felt I needed to be. So I kept stopping. Finally, I got onto a roll. I was about 3/4 of the way through the book, and I had even gone back to school to get a master's of creative writing, to get some more tips. And at that point, because at that point I'd been writing it as fiction, and I learned, nope, this isn't fiction. This is my life. This is women's lives. It needs to be the nonfiction. But I just got stuck. And one day I was in the library, and I was really desperate. Desperation has always served me well. I was sitting in the library, and I thought, why can't I just write this book? This has been like 20 years I'd been working on it by then. So I did a little trick that actually I had learned in school, which was, it's a Gestalt therapy exercise, for those of you from way back who might remember Gestalt. And I put my block in a chair opposite me, and we had a conversation, and I looked like I was just writing my story in the library. I wrote down everything that we talked about, my block and me, and I said to the block, who are you? Why are you stopping me writing? Like, I personified it. And the block said, my name is Fear. And it turned out, as the conversation went on, that Fear was really pissed off at me that I didn't just write the book. I knew what I wanted to say. I had lots of notes. Why didn't I just say it? And I said, well, because of this fear of being so vulnerable, and what will people think? And then I said, and Fear was a real construction worker, yelled at me. And then I said, I need help. And I asked Fear, I said, would you help me? And Fear said, I don't usually get asked that. But I was desperate, remember? So Fear said, okay. And I mean, this sounds a bit wonky, but every time after that I'd get stuck again, I would literally call on Fear. I would ask it to help me, and it did. And that, I was still afraid. The day I launched this book, I was shaking so badly, I could hardly sign my name. But I found this quote the other day from a poet, Muriel Rukeyser, who said, fear is an indication we're cut off from our own reality. And I think that's what it was. I was afraid to say exactly what it was like for me. And so Fear helped me say it. And then, and one other thing I think that really helped me was writing poetry. Because I had written at that point 3 books of poetry about construction. And I'd written books about artists, Emily Carr, Georgia O'Keeffe, Glenn Gould, all of whom dealt with, if you're a performer, an artist, you deal with fear. Mm-hmm. And I learned from poetry that you can't fake it. If you're not being honest, it just shines right through, and the poem doesn't move you, let alone anybody else. So that was also helpful, that background.
Well, that honest voice is really strong in your writing, and I really appreciated it. It's and fear has a helpmeet. A lot of people let themselves get stopped by fear.
Yeah.
But it's almost like fear might have been a bit of a motivator for you as well in your work as a carpenter, because you were often afraid and you didn't let it stop you, and it comes through in the writing. So you're also refreshingly frank about sexuality, your own personal life, not in a prurient way, just in an honest way. and also how it affected the job.
Yeah. I think that had a lot to do with being raised, sort of coming out as a feminist in the 70s. When that was a huge issue for us. So I was raised in the 50s. I was born in 1947. In the 50s, a nice girl basically was ashamed of her body. And you did what you were supposed to do to try and look good for the men. But basically, a woman's body was dirty, right? That was the message. And we fought that really hard through the 70s. There's a story in here in the book where I went down to the Women's Health Collective in Vancouver, and we all sat around in a circle looking at our vaginas with a speculum and a flashlight, and they were beautiful. Like, we broke through the shame. So after a while, and the other thing we were doing was talking to each other. So we were in those CR groups, consciousness raising groups, where we could talk, and we did, about anything. No matter how, nothing was too personal, nothing was too scary. We learned a lot about ourselves by talking to each other. And that helped me so that it didn't seem a big deal, the sexuality. I find misogyny much harder to deal with than issues of sexuality. You know, that. Do you want me to read a bit about how I wrote about that?
Yeah, sure. If you've got a passage picked out, that'd be great.
This one's on page 42. It's one of the ones that took me, I had to think long and hard about including this in the book, because for me, this is about as far as I wanted to go toward my own sexuality in construction. But construction is physical. That's one of the things I most loved about it, as how physical it is, how good you feel in your body. And so this one is, the chapter's called On the Tools, and I talk about how much I loved the tools and how much you rely on them for your safety as well as for your work. So I'm talking here about my tool belt. And on the tool belt, so I talk about all the pockets and what I carried in my pockets. But I also had loops on each side, and this is about the loops. Boy, those loops. That's where the hammer went. Some guys wanted metal ones that would clank and rattle when they walked. Macho, noisy loops. Not me. I loved my soft suede ones, silent, beautiful loops, just there to do their job, like me. Excuse me. What I wanted was not the sound, but the feeling of my hammer swaying, the weight of it at my right hip, easy to my right hand. I wanted the slight pull of it. You know that feeling when you're about to get your period and there's a downward tugging at your core? That's how a hammer feels. Its weight says, I'm here. Just a reminder, in case, whenever you need me. And it swings, carrying my hammer on the right side, with the nail puller and the sliding square in the loop on my left, was like walking with a grass skirt over naked hips. Sensory? Hell, it was sexy. On the good days. On the good days, which came after about 3 years in the trade, on a crew where the guys had decided I was okay. On the good days, I'd swing across a newly laid ply floor with the smell of sweet-cut fir and hemlock rising like the steam of a spa around me, sun shining down like 1,000 warm candles, and flaunt my way to the next spot I had to work. That was fun.
I love the warm sun in that too. So the statistics, you talked about this at the beginning. The statistics haven't changed very much in 45 years. And women have gone from 3% to 4% of the trades workforce. It sounds like women train for the trades, but maybe don't stick with them. Do you want to talk some more about why there aren't more women in the trades and what you would like to see change?
Sure. And I think this isn't just me, but we've had, over the years, there were conferences of women. We've talked with each other about this a lot. I'm still in touch with women in the trades in Canada and the US. So this has been a sort of situation for quite a few years. Those two issues that I mentioned at the beginning, one is our isolation, and the second one being the culture of the job. So I think the problem, I'll read a bit about this, and then maybe I'll read first and then talk a bit about it. So I'm on page 136. And I did say harassment isn't a big issue. It's more this issue of the isolation and the culture. But there is also harassment. And when someone's being harassed on a job, everybody knows it. But it's one of the more hurtful and damaging parts of a traditional male, and I should say North American culture, to put up with it. Pretend it's not happening. Let the one being harassed deal with it in their own way. And incidentally, hope their rising anxiety levels don't cause them to have an accident. This is not just an issue of social justice. It's an issue of health and safety. And I must say, the one time I put my hand in a saw was when I was being really badly harassed. So I wasn't focusing. I wasn't concentrating. My hand's okay, by the way, a bit crooked. But it's one of the more hurtful and damaging parts of the traditional male culture to put up. Sorry, I read that. So it's not just social justice. It's an issue of health and safety. It's an issue also of training enough skilled tradespeople so that we can build and repair and maintain our national and provincial infrastructures. And it's not just a gender problem. Any construction site you walk by these days, take a look. They're almost all white men. Trucking flaggers would be more women, and trucking would be more Indo-Canadians. But generally, it's an issue of every kind of discrimination, including racism and homophobia. I actually don't think I never in 15 years knowingly worked with a gay guy. And I think if any guy had been out gay, he would have had an accident. There was that strong a feeling about the importance of being manly on the job. And I do think that is beginning to change. There's a woman now in Victoria who's trans, who's on the job as a woman. So thank goodness some things are changing, but not those numbers. So the point is not to have our infrastructure built by straight white men. It's to have it built, period. And even better if the crew get along and are happy to go to work each morning. So here's an idea. What if a guy was giving a woman a hard time, and instead of laying off the woman, which is what's traditionally done, or waiting for her to quit, the foreman fired the harasser? Or even better, what if people on the crew took anti-bullying advice to heart and they told the harasser to stop? What if the harassers were told, or the people bugging other people, not treating them with respect, it doesn't matter what you think. If you want to work here, keep your mouth shut and start acting respectfully, or you're gone. Word spreads fast on a construction site. Within a day, everyone would know there was a new standard of behavior. It's time for the men who are still a vast majority of the trades to step up, to work at work as well as elsewhere. We need the leadership of strong, capable men showing other men how to behave as decent, respectful human beings to all their employees. We need men courageous enough to risk the discomfort and even ostracization of colleagues in order to create safe, just, productive working environments where women, where all of us can stay and contribute. We're in the 21st century now. Macho is out. The new definition of a strong man is a man who shows strong, fearless leadership. What are we waiting for?
I would like to tell our audience that that is the note on which the book ends, although there is a poem as well. Kate, just before we wrap up this part of this launch, is there any part that you would like to read that you just love? Something, I don't know, just something that really turns your crank about your book, in your book.
Well, I guess I was worried when I wrote this one that was a tougher book, that people would just think that it was hard. And as I said before, yeah, sometimes it's hard, but other times it's absolute bliss and heaven to be working in construction. So I do have a chapter, which I mentioned at the beginning, called What I Learned from the Men. And I'm going to read a bit from that, because it was like my thanking the men I've worked with, particularly the men who hired me, the men who kept an eye out for me, the men who trained me. What I learned from the men. I learned brotherhood, not just because I became a credentialed member of the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America, and my letter sending me my Red Seal certification as a carpenter was addressed to Brother Kate. So I learned brotherhood not just because I became a member of the brotherhood, but because I learned how to walk, talk, and think, sort of, like them. That is, I learned what they think, but I was never entirely clear on why they thought it. I learned to accept. They just did. I learned my trade. I couldn't have earned the Red Seal certificate that marked me a fully qualified carpenter. Couldn't have run my own renovation business without men who were willing to work with me and teach me. And particularly, I name Ted Bowerman, Jack Carpe, Heron Douglas, Colin Boyd, and Cal, who's in the book, but whose last name I never learned. Also, Bill Zander and many of the men in the Carpenters Union. They loved the work as much as I did, and they respected the trade above all else. And the trade itself? I learned the mysteries of why a building stands, the power of triangles, the beauty of rafters and stairs, the sorcery of a framing square. It was magic what we did. I will always be grateful. That was one of the most fun things to write.
That's really lovely, and it echoes the cover, where you've got the beauty of the structure on the cover.
That was always my favorite moment on a job after we framed, and those were usually not the union jobs because those were high rises, but on smaller jobs where we were doing home building, that moment where you finished framing the roof, and then you go down and have your lunch, and you look up at this beautiful structure against the sky. It's like sculpture. And you know it's solid, you know it's well built, you know it's going to keep this house standing and dry. Yeah, I love that. I love the cover for that reason. Yeah.
I'm glad you chose that so that we can emphasize not only the difficulty of this, but the joy too. Mm-hmm. I'm going to take a look here at some questions. Somebody has Marshall Sewells. I'm not sure about the last name.
Yeah.
Sometimes fear for a carpenter is healthy paranoia. Is that the same as for a writer?
Good question, Marshall. We taught together when I was teaching creative writing at Malaspina, what was then Malaspina, now Vancouver Island University in Nanaimo. Sorry, say it again.
Healthy paranoia. Let's see, where is it? So sometimes fear for a carpenter is healthy paranoia. Same for a writer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, with carpentry, fear it's more caution, I would say, than fear. Because if you're not careful, you're going to die. You're going to step off the edge or go down where you didn't nail that, rafter or that joist properly. So caution and awareness. One of the things I loved about the trade was I'm a space case. I'm a poet in my other life. And construction made me pay very strict attention. So I felt very alive in that. Every moment, if I wasn't paying attention, I could die, if you want to exaggerate it. So fear was helpful there. And I guess in the same way in writing, it's a sort of an alarm bell, but it's very different. It's not physical fear. It's emotional fear, the exposure, which I talked about at the beginning, about being too exposed emotionally. And the only way I got past that by asking fear to help me was by knowing that I wasn't doing this for myself. I was doing this for other women, for young women, because we need more women. Women can do this. We've proved that over and over. So it has its uses, yes.
Healthy paranoia, because here be danger. Right?
Yeah.
And then face it.
Yeah.
Zoe Landale wants to know, how many years was this book in the making?
Cool.
You did hear the word 20 get bandied in there somewhere.
Yes. And that was before it was finished. I did start writing it when I was still on the tools. So that was back. I stopped construction and went into teaching construction at BCIT. And I stopped construction about 91, started teaching. And then in 90, it's all a blur now, 94 or so, I went into the creative writing program at UBC. But I was really writing it the whole 15 years I was in the trade. Sorry, what was your question? I'm having trouble concentrating.
It's the book in the making.
Yeah, so it was in the making the whole 15 years I was in the trade. So that started in 77 was when I started on Pender Island as a laborer. And yeah, it was hard all along the way, but it's been in the works since then, and it actually got published. Well, this, as I said, the first one got published in 2000, what was it, 6? And then this one. So yeah, it's been a long, long time working it out. And I feel like now with this book, I feel like I've said what I need to say. And it's thrilling to me that young women are stepping up. Young women are starting to write. There's a young woman in Victoria who's doing cartooning. She's an electrician. So it's we're moving very slowly on this, but yeah, we need to move. And I'm hoping, I'm in my 70s now, I'm hoping that we can, that torch will be passed and other women and men will write about this.
Yeah, I think in our conversation on Tuesday, you were telling me you finished this one and then the Journeywoman and published in 2012. But then there was still something you wanted to say directly to the young tradeswomen from your experience, some advice, some distillation, some some notes of a journeywoman.
Yeah, exactly.
So another question, John Terpstra wants to know, what's the connection between carpentry and poetry?
Oh, that's a wicked question. John Terpstra doesn't tell you that he is a carpenter too. And we've actually toured together, reading together. So he knows the answer, at least as well as I do. It's a construction, I would say, that we put words together for a goal in a poem that is whole and solid, that people can come back to, that is beautiful if we're lucky. Yeah. John knows this too. He's a wonderful poet.
You need a framework, I'm going to guess.
Well, sometimes actually, no. With construction, there's a blueprint, yeah, and there's a tradition. And the tradition, which is how you learn to be a carpenter, is you just do what you're told, because the tradition, the apprenticeship, is very important, and it's been hundreds and hundreds of years that people have been refining how to teach total newcomers who are a disaster when they first come on the work site how to build. Poetry, so construction, there is a framework, and that's why you just do what you're told. But poetry, you're on your own. And in a way, the thing about poetry, which is totally opposite from construction for me, is that it's like putting a foot out over open space and stepping out and hoping you'll be caught. I'd be interested in what John has to say, but for me, it's if I don't trust that some deeper voice, deeper knowledge, deeper awareness can carry me, it won't be a good poem. And but and I guess in a way that's a comparison, because construction too, you're trusting that all the voices of all those builders of all those years are teaching you right, that you're doing it the way that will be solid, you won't fall, nothing will fall down on anybody else. Yeah, they're sort of, I guess in that way, they're complementary, and they're both very beautiful when they're done right.
So Susan Eisenberg wants to know, if this feels like a completion of the writing you want to do about working in the trades, what's next?
Oh.
What else are you going in form or content to explore?
Susan Eisenberg is a wonderful writer and an electrician.
Your writer / trades friends.
Exactly. And yeah, she lives over on the coast in around Boston. So the question is, what comes next?
Yeah, either form or content. If you're done writing about working in the trades, what are you thinking about, form or content next?
Well, you know how I said the poetry was like stepping off and having faith that there'd be something there to hold you up? That's sort of how I feel now about where I want to go next. I still passionately care about, especially about women in construction. I think we have an enormous amount to add to the trade. And when a woman comes on the job, Min will tell you the job changes, usually in a good way, gets safer, for example. They don't have to be so macho about taking chances. So I sort of have that. I just am at the point now, I just have faith that whatever I write next or do next, and it may in fact be something to do with construction, but I'm just giving myself an open wall because my life has been, I love construction. I love the women that I've met in construction, the men, but I just want to open the door a little more and see what happens.
Open it up and say, come on in.
Exactly. Yeah. Or step out and hope there's a floor there. Yeah.
There's another question here. Oh, I lost something. Danielle, oh, here it is. When we are able to gather again, are we going to have another conference or celebration?
Who was that? Who is that from?
It wasn't named. Somebody just wants a party, Kate.
Sure.
Let's celebrate.
Yeah. I mean, it's one, I must say, there were a few women in trades conferences. Marcia Brandy was one of the keys to organizing those. And it was extraordinary to get together with other tradeswomen because we all know what we know. We know the same thing. And so I love other tradeswomen. Sure, I'll get together anytime.
All right.
And I continue to work with some tradeswomen on different sort of issues. So yeah, I don't. This will never leave my life. Celebration is always welcome.
That's a kind of a segue to the next question by Vivian Price. She wants to know. She loved hearing you read your work. I just found out about red bait. Are you interested in writing about the politics of unionism?
That's a tricky question. Yeah, red bait, by the way, for people who don't know it, I wrote an old trade unionist from a left-wing union called Mine Mill, which eventually was taken over by the Steelworkers Union in a very nasty sort of connection. One of the guys who was the organizer, Al King, asked me to write his story, and that was red bait. It was considered a communist union. Al was a communist, and they did some amazing organizing in the mines and mills around early BC, a lot to do with health and safety in the mines. Okay, so I'm spaced out here now. What was the question again?
Are you interested in writing more about unionism?
Right. I don't know. My union experience was really good when it was good,
yeah,
and really bad when it was bad. And the bad mostly came at the very end when we got a different dispatcher. And the guy who had been our dispatcher was a wonderful man who I found out later was standing up for me every time I got sent out, because you're next on the list, you get sent out to the next job. He would get a phone call saying, "What the hell are you doing sending me a woman?" And this is in the early 80s. And he would say, "You wanted a carpenter, you got one. If she doesn't work out in 2 weeks, send her back." So he protected me, and I would stay. He protected me, but the next dispatcher did not. And when I went in to ask why I hadn't been dispatched for months, and at that point I'd started doing other things. I was more and more interested in writing. I saw myself committing myself more to writing. But finally I needed work. Carpentry paid really well. So I went in to talk to the new dispatcher, and I realized within moments I was never going to work again. And I talked, later I ran into a guy I knew on the job, a Fijian guy, man of color. And I said, "By the way, are you working?" He said, "No, I haven't worked since the new dispatcher." And we both went, "Okay." So that guy is now gone. And then they kicked me out of the union. I was a member. I had my 15-year pin. And then next thing I knew, I wasn't getting any of the notices about paying dues. And I wrote back in, and kick me out of the union. So I think the union is going through some hard times. What I understand is it's starting to pull itself back together. But at the moment, it doesn't feel very welcoming. And maybe that has something to do with the fact that there aren't a lot of women. It's very personal. When a man who has worked all his life with only men in the trade is asked to hire a woman, and I know this from some of the men I've applied to when I was starting out, especially, it takes a particular kind of man to say, yep, I'll give you a try. I've never had a woman here before, but I'll give you a try. And some men just cannot handle that. And the ones who do are blessed and have made it possible for those of us who are in the trade. But it's still tricky. We're not there yet.
It sounds very, very your experience of unions, like the other parts of your experience, very, very personal. It really depended on who it was.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know how we're doing for time here. One last question. You credit Deborah Tannen, whose book was really important to me as well. What was one takeaway you got in your trades days from her study of male-female ways of speaking? And do you think any of that is changing?
Well, I guess the biggest takeaway I got from her is that men and women sort of see each other's company differently. Now, this is a huge generalization, but it sure helped. So men see each other in a competitive way, sort of everything's hierarchy. Who's better? Who's got the heaviest hammer? Like, I have stories about guys coming in with outrageously big hammers just to show off, and everybody else in awe.
That was really funny, by the way. I really like that story.
It was at the time too.
I'll bet.
But for women, there's more of a sense. I mean, this is sort of embarrassingly biological, but for women, it's more inclusiveness. How are you feeling? What's the matter? Can I give you a hand? You know, sorry, I've lost the question again. I'm thinking about 12 things at once.
Just wondering about if you think that the Deborah Tannen's ideas of how men and women speak differently, do you think that's changing at all? Or is the culture as strong as it ever was?
Yeah, the short answer is I don't know, and I hope so. And I guess my hope is the younger men. There were some extraordinary men of, my generation and older. I wouldn't be a carpenter if it wasn't for them. Men who took me under their wing, who taught me, trained me. But in general, the men I had the easiest time with tended to be, for example, men with who had been raised by single moms, Indigenous men, First Nations guys. A lot of them, they're familiar with matriarchy. They can accept, like we would, when I was up north working with the Native guys, we sort of check each other out. But once we respected each other's skills, I've never felt so at ease or comfortable on a job as with the tall tan guys I worked with up north. So, and I think younger men, there's a piece, I didn't read it today because it's a bit long, but there's a piece about the very last job I was on where there was one carpenter who was an older man, but he had not been trained. He was quite intimidated by me because I had gone through my 4-year apprenticeship. I had run my own company. I had taught construction at BCIT. So he was quite threatened by me, but he put up with me, which is the way a lot of men were. And then there was a young apprentice who had been raised by a single mom. And that young apprentice and I got along really well, almost too well. Like I worried about, are we talking too much? And then I'd stop talking and he'd start chattering. So some of my hope is that younger men who've, more of them probably raised by mothers, single mothers, but also young men who have feminist partners who are not so afraid of women. In my generation, men were basically, my sense was they were afraid of us. You know, as I read, you know, we can have babies and build houses. One guy actually said to me, then what do you need us for? I live with a man. I'm heterosexual. I have a son. It was shocking, but that kind of fear has really held women out of this field. And my hope is, and when I see young men and that the trans woman who's in construction openly as a woman, I think this gives me some hope that that what Tannen wrote about may be softening somewhat. And I've also been told by women in other countries that it's not so extreme there. Now, I think that varies a lot, but it's tricky.
It's probably a continuum.
And it's going to, yeah, thanks.
There are a couple of other questions, but I think that you've spoken a bit about poetry and construction and union. Maybe you answered their questions just in what you said, and we're just on an hour, and there's Monica here to take over. So thank you so much for this conversation, Kate. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you all for coming. I'm deeply grateful that people still care about this issue, that we're still working on it, and that the women at Caitlin Press are willing to put out these books is great for me. And thank you to you too, Lou. It was great.
So thank you, Kate. Thank you, Lou. Getting a little feedback, so I just keep muting your mic. Sorry, Lou. I want to just thank you both so much and remind people they can buy the book. It's now available. We highly encourage you to support your independent bookstore. And if you would prefer to buy direct from us, there's a little buy the book button there. Or if you want to send that page to someone you know that you think will love this. I know we didn't get to all the audience questions. I'm going to say that if you read the book, they'll probably answer your questions. And if not, follow Caitlin Press on social media, and I'm sure Kate will be doing more events. Hopefully when we're able to gather again, we can have some little bit delayed book celebrations. But thank you very much, both Kate and Lou. Thank you for everyone who joined us. I enjoyed seeing all the chat. And yes, so thank you for spending the afternoon with us. And Kate, do you have any final thank yous?
Well, to you at Caitlin and Vicky and Sarah especially, and also to you, Lou, for doing this for us. And for people tuning in, support your local tradeswomen. That's all I can say.
Absolutely.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.